If you were an HR director, CHRO, or compliance leader, what the White House just put on paper is the clearest signal HR has received in years about where federal AI governance is going. And today, we are breaking it down in real time. Welcome to a special executive briefing from CriticalThink HR. And I want to be precise from the start about what we are reacting to. This is a framework and direction of travel document from the White House, not a new federal employment law that suddenly changed your obligations overnight. But that distinction should not make anyone relax. In moments like this, the organizations that move first are the ones that understand the signal before the statute arrives. Smart HR leaders do not wait for every line of law to be finalized before they build governance, policy, and defensibility into their systems. Joining me to unpack what this means for HR is our resident HR strategy expert and practitioner, Rebecca. Rebecca, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Mike. And you're right to frame it that way immediately, because the first thing I want every HR leader watching this to understand is the difference between a signal and a statute. A White House framework like this is not the same thing as enacted law, but it is still highly consequential because it shows where federal policy momentum is heading. When the executive branch lays out a roadmap this clearly, leaders in HR, legal, compliance, and operations should assume they're looking at the architecture of what may come next. The organizations that will be ahead of the curve are the ones who study that signal now and build toward it before the pressure becomes mandatory.
Exactly. So let's start right at the document itself. What is it and what are its core pillars? Because there is a lot in here that touches HR directly or indirectly.
The framework is organized around several major policy themes, and HR has a stake in nearly all of them. Let me walk through the ones that matter most to the people watching this. One of the biggest themes for multi-state employers is the push toward a more unified federal AI baseline. For the last couple of years, employers have been navigating an emerging patchwork of state AI rules and employment-related requirements, including enacted measures in states such as Colorado and Illinois, and broader AI activity in other jurisdictions. For organizations operating across multiple states, that patchwork creates real complexity. This framework points toward a more centralized national approach and a reduced appetite for a fragmented 50-state model.
Now that sounds like good news for HR teams trying to manage multi-state compliance, but there's a major nuance there, right?
Massive nuance. Even if the policy direction is clearly toward more federal uniformity, that does not mean existing state obligations disappear today. So what does that mean for HR right now? It means you cannot look at a federal framework and say, great, I can stop paying attention to state-level AI or employment rules. Until Congress acts, courts interpret, agencies enforce, and rules settle, those state-level obligations and risk environments are still very much in play. What this framework tells you is the direction of travel. Build toward a stronger, unified internal governance standard that could survive a national baseline, but do not drop your state-level compliance work in the meantime.
That's a critical distinction, and I want to make sure people heard it. Federal direction does not erase current state obligations. Keep both tracks moving. Now, another major feature of the framework is the idea that the federal government is not looking to create a brand new all-purpose AI superagency. What does that mean from an enforcement standpoint?
This is a significant architectural choice. The basic idea is that AI oversight will continue to run through existing agencies with subject matter authority, rather than through a single, entirely new regulator. For HR, that matters because the agencies that already have authority over workplace and employment issues, the EEOC, the Department of Labor, and others depending on context, remain central players. And I want to be very clear here, that is not because this framework created new EEOC authority. The EEOC's authority over discriminatory employment practices predates all of this by decades. What the framework does is reinforce continuity. If AI is used inside hiring, promotion, discipline, pay, surveillance, or termination processes, employers should assume the same anti-discrimination principles still apply.
So the sheriff's office didn't change. We're still dealing with the same core enforcers, just in a more AI-saturated environment.
Exactly. And that is actually useful for HR leaders because it means you're not waiting around to discover an entirely new legal universe. You already know the core standards that matter: fairness, consistency, documentation, non-discrimination, appropriate review, and accountability. The question is whether your AI-enabled systems can actually withstand those standards.
Let's talk about two more provisions that I think are going to generate a lot of conversation in HR circles. The first is intellectual property, and specifically digital replicas. This is genuinely new territory.
This is one of the most forward-looking parts of the broader AI policy conversation, and HR needs to pay attention now. The underlying direction is towards stronger protection against the unauthorized commercial use of AI-generated replicas of a person's voice, likeness, or other identifiable attributes. Think deepfakes, think AI voice cloning, think synthetic training presenters or executive avatars. There will almost certainly be carve-outs around parody, satire, news reporting, and other protected expression. But the business principle is already clear. If you are using an AI-generated replica of a real person in a commercial or workplace context without clear consent and governance, you are taking on unnecessary risk.
And the HR application there is significant. Think about training videos, onboarding content, internal communications, even branded recruiting assets.
Exactly. If you create an AI avatar of an employee, their face, their voice, their likeness, to generate training or communications content, and then that employee leaves the company, what are your rights versus theirs? That question is not fully settled across all jurisdictions today, but the direction of policy is telling you not to wait. Smart HR leaders are building consent language, usage boundaries, ownership clauses, and post-employment considerations into their employment agreements and content policies right now, before legislation forces the conversation.
And the second provision I want to flag is the broader free speech and content governance theme. The framework signals concern about government pressure on AI platforms to alter or suppress content.
And I want to be precise about the scope here because this is easy to overread. The main thrust is about government influence on platforms, not a direct federal command telling private employers exactly how to configure their internal tools tomorrow morning. However, HR still needs to be thoughtful. If your organization is using AI in ways that affect employee communications, monitoring, evaluations, or internal decision support, you want to ensure those systems are not producing outcomes that look arbitrary, ideologically slanted, or impossible to defend. Not because this specific framework creates that obligation by itself, but because scrutiny around bias, fairness, and explainability is clearly increasing, and the organizations that are out ahead of that scrutiny will be the ones that built proactively.
So even where the framework doesn't create direct HR obligations today, it is still telling us where public scrutiny and future governance pressure are likely to come from.
Precisely. Read it as a map of the terrain being built. You want to be standing on solid ground before the roads are finished.
And finally in the framework, workforce development. The broader policy signal is that the federal government expects AI to reshape work at the task level, and it expects workforce development systems to respond.
And for HR, that becomes a strategic mandate, not a legal one in the narrow sense, but a very real strategic one. The federal direction is clearly toward more AI literacy, more workforce adaptation, and more reskilling. Organizations that get ahead of that curve, that build internal AI fluency, responsible use training, and role-based enablement now are going to have a major advantage in capability, retention, and credibility.
Excellent context. Now let's make the pivot, because the White House framework is pointing in a direction, but the road that HR leaders need to walk today is built on existing law and best practice. Rebecca, let's talk about what proactive, forward-thinking HR looks like right now.
This is where I want to be really clear with everyone watching. Everything I'm about to share is not something you're waiting on Congress to invent. These issues are grounded in existing anti-discrimination law, existing privacy and confidentiality expectations, existing agency scrutiny, and established governance best practices. The White House framework raises the urgency. It does not create all of these obligations from scratch.
Let's start with the compliance layer. We mentioned the EEOC. What does existing law actually require of employers when it comes to AI in HR decisions?
Under federal employment discrimination laws enforced by the EEOC, employers need to ensure that their employment practices, including automated, algorithmic, or AI-assisted ones, do not unlawfully discriminate or create unjustified disparate impact on protected groups. That standard did not disappear when AI entered the picture. If your ATS, screening model, interview analysis tool, or performance system is producing outcomes that would be problematic if a human were doing the same thing, you do not get a free pass just because software is involved. What this means practically is that you need to understand how your AI tools are being used, what they are influencing, and whether the outcomes are defensible. If you cannot explain why a candidate was screened out or why a recommendation was made, you have a governance problem. And critically, you should not assume the vendor absorbs that risk for you. If a vendor tool contributes to discriminatory outcomes, the employer can still be exposed.
That is the golden rule. You can outsource the technology. You cannot outsource accountability.
Full stop. Which is why vendor due diligence has to be part of your HR tech procurement process starting now. Before you sign any contract with an ATS, a performance platform, a talent marketplace, or a learning system that uses AI, you need to ask 3 critical questions. First, what kinds of data or logic are shaping this model? Second, what are the vendor's data use terms, including whether your organization's data can be used to improve future versions? And third, and this is the question many vendors struggle with, what independent evidence can they provide regarding bias testing, adverse impact review, or other meaningful validation? If they cannot answer that third question with substance, that is a red flag.
And this isn't a one-time check at contract signing, right? These systems evolve.
Exactly. Model behavior changes, product features change, data changes, risk changes. A system that looked acceptable at implementation may look very different 6 months later. That means auditing cannot be a one-and-done exercise. Build a recurring review cadence into your HR tech governance process. For higher stakes uses, hiring, promotion, performance scoring, termination support, the review should be even tighter, and outside expertise may be appropriate. And document everything. If scrutiny ever comes, your documented good faith governance effort matters enormously.
Let's talk about the governance philosophy, because I think this is where CriticalThink's approach really shines a light on something the industry is getting wrong.
Most organizations are still approaching AI governance like they approach every new regulation. They build a checklist, and checklists by themselves fail because the technology moves faster than the checklist committee. By the time the document is approved, the tool has changed, the workflow has changed, and the risk profile has changed. The shift forward-thinking organizations are making is from compliance to defensibility. The real question isn't just, can we legally do this? The deeper question is, if this decision is challenged by a regulator, in court, by an employee, or in the public sphere, can we explain it, justify it, and document it? That requires a structured decision governance system, not just a static policy binder.
And that aligns directly with what we teach through the CriticalThink methodology. The most defensible decision isn't always the most obvious one. It's the one you can explain, justify, and document. How does that apply when AI is making or informing the decision?
It means human oversight should be treated as a core governance requirement for high-stakes employment decisions. AI is a co-pilot, not an autopilot. Every consequential decision, a hire, a termination, a performance evaluation, a promotion, a major pay recommendation, should have a human being who reviewed the AI's output, exercised independent judgment, and took accountability for the final call. Human in the loop is one of the clearest defensibility standards an employer can adopt. In some regulatory contexts outside the U.S., explicit human oversight is becoming even more formalized. But even where it is not spelled out as a single blanket legal rule, it remains one of the strongest governance practices you can put in place.
Let's go deeper on algorithmic bias, because I think people assume AI bias is intentional, or that vendors would always catch it. That's not how it works.
Not at all. AI does not need malicious intent to create harmful outcomes. It has a pattern learning problem. These tools learn from historical data, proxies, correlations, and optimization goals, and the history of hiring, promotion, evaluation, and pay is not neutral. If your organization has historically favored certain backgrounds, schools, career paths, language patterns, or behavioral markers, an AI system may quietly learn those patterns and treat them as signals of quality, amplifying them at a scale no human hiring manager ever could. The phrase I use is, AI doesn't create bias out of thin air. It can industrialize it. It can scale past bias at machine speed.
Which is why auditing is so important. You have to test the outcomes, not just admire the interface.
Exactly. HR has to own the question, is this tool producing fair outcomes across relevant groups? Not just, did the vendor tell us it's fair? Run your own reviews, look for adverse impact, test edge cases, bring in independent validation where the stakes justify it. If the system is drifting, you want to know before someone else discovers it for you.
Let's get tactical. Let's talk about what actually goes in the employee handbook right now. Because before any of the governance architecture is built, most organizations have a problem they haven't fully acknowledged yet: shadow AI.
Shadow AI is the reality that your employees are already using AI tools, whether you formally approved them or not. ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, image generators, meeting summarizers, note assistants, code copilots, the usage is happening. If you issue a blanket ban, many employees will simply hide it. So your policy goal is not naive prohibition. Your goal is channeling. You want boundaries clear enough that employees can innovate safely, and guardrails strong enough that they cannot accidentally create a liability event.
What's the most important architectural decision in an AI acceptable use policy?
The first and most critical distinction is public versus enterprise-controlled AI environments. Public tools present much greater uncertainty around data handling, retention, access, and exposure, especially when employees are using free or personal accounts outside organizational controls. Your policy should state plainly, no company code, no trade secrets, no employee data, no candidate data, and no confidential business information into unapproved public AI tools, period. Approved enterprise environments should be limited to tools covered by your organization's contract terms, admin controls, security architecture, and data protection commitments. For example, offerings such as Microsoft 365 Copilot, ChatGPT Business or Enterprise, or Claude for Enterprise, when configured and governed appropriately.
Paint the nightmare scenario for PII, personally identifiable information.
The nightmare scenario is an HR manager who takes a spreadsheet of employee performance reviews, real names, salaries, leave information, performance ratings, accommodation-related notes, or other sensitive records, and uploads it into a public AI tool to help draft evaluations or a termination letter. What feels like a time-saving shortcut can become an ADA confidentiality issue, a state privacy or data security violation, a serious internal policy breach, and a legal risk event in waiting. HIPAA may be implicated in narrower covered plan or covered provider contexts, but you should not casually assume every employer-held record is a HIPAA issue. The broader and more universal point is that sensitive employment and health-related data should not be pushed into uncontrolled tools under any circumstances. The policy needs to be explicit. Do not put real employee data into AI tools unless the environment is approved and the data handling is authorized. Ask AI to draft a performance improvement plan template for an employee missing performance targets, not, here is John Smith's file, write the PIP for me.
And the policy has to be role-specific, right? What's appropriate for marketing is very different from HR or finance.
Absolutely. A one-size-fits-all policy usually fails. Marketing may be able to use AI for brainstorming and draft generation at relatively lower risk. HR using AI to draft legally sensitive employment communications carries much higher risk and often needs legal review or tighter workflow controls. Finance using AI around unreleased results or market-sensitive information creates a different kind of exposure entirely. Your AUP should reflect those differences. Innovation-forward guidance where the risk is lower, much stricter controls where the risk is higher. The policy has to match the actual risk profile of each function.
Let's go deeper on vendor due diligence, because this is an area where a lot of HR leaders feel powerless. They feel like the vendor holds all the cards.
You have more leverage than you think, especially at contract negotiation. Vendors want your business. The time to ask hard questions is before you sign, not after. And if a vendor refuses to answer basic governance questions or cannot produce meaningful documentation, that tells you something important before you ever deploy the tool. Here are the non-negotiables. 1. What is the intended use of the system, and what are the material limitations? 2. What happens to your organization's data, prompts, and outputs under the contract? And can your data ever be used to train future versions of the model? 3. What validation, audit, or testing evidence can the vendor provide around fairness, reliability, or adverse impact? 4. What notice will they give you when the system changes materially? Build ongoing review rights into the contract itself. Systems evolve. You need the right to request updated information, reassess risk, and escalate if the system begins creating unacceptable exposure.
And document every step of that process internally.
If it isn't documented, it didn't happen. Your vendor vetting process, your legal review, your deployment rationale, your approval path, your monitoring cadence, that record matters. If a claim is ever filed, the question won't just be whether a problem occurred. The question will also be whether you acted responsibly, intentionally, and in good faith to prevent foreseeable harm. Documentation is how you prove that answer is yes.
Let's pivot to the human element, because governance and policy are only as effective as the people inside them. The technology is one thing, the fear is another. People believe AI is coming for their jobs. How does HR manage the psychology of that?
HR has to lead the cultural transformation, not just the policy compliance. And the goal is to move people from fear to fluency. If employees don't understand how AI tools work, one of two things usually happens. They avoid the tools entirely, or they use them recklessly. Neither outcome helps the organization. The broader policy environment is clearly signaling that work is being reshaped at the task level. The point is not that every employee now has to become a data scientist. The point is that many jobs will shift in how work gets done, what gets automated, what gets reviewed, and where humans add the most value. HR's role is to help employees understand that distinction and build the skills to work alongside these tools effectively.
What does that look like practically in terms of training?
Start with prompt literacy and tool literacy, teaching employees how to use AI tools effectively, safely, and within policy. Then layer on verification and fact-checking, because hallucinations and AI overconfidence are real, and the employee is always responsible for what they submit. And for managers specifically, teach them how to integrate AI into workflows without surrendering judgment, review, or accountability. Position every piece of this as professional development, not as a threat narrative. The employees who learn how to use these tools responsibly become more effective, not less valuable. That is the message that converts fear into engagement.
And the digital replica issue we discussed from the framework, HR needs policies for that now, not after the law catches up.
Exactly. Companies are already using AI to generate training videos, recruiting content, internal messages, and executive communications using voices and likenesses of real people. Build consent into your employment agreements now. Address ownership and permitted use now. If an employee helps create an avatar, replica, or synthetic asset for company use, what happens if they leave? Who controls continued use? What approvals are required? What uses are off limits? Those questions are significantly easier to answer before there is a dispute than after one.
Okay, we have covered the White House framework, we've covered the current risk environment, we've covered best practices. Let's bring it to ground level. If someone is watching this today and they're an HR director at a mid-sized company, what do they do first?
3 actions. This week, no exceptions. Action 1. Issue an interim one-page AI policy now. Don't wait for a committee. Don't wait for a 40-page manual. Issue a stopgap that covers 3 non-negotiables. No PII, trade secrets, or confidential employment data into unapproved public AI tools. All AI-generated work must be reviewed and verified by a human before official use, and any new AI software purchase requires IT, legal, and appropriate business review. 1 page, out the door today. Action 2. Audit your current HR tech stack. Pull up every vendor whose product touches an employment decision: your ATS, interview platform, performance system, internal mobility platform, learning system. Ask them the governance questions we discussed. Put your requests in writing. Create the documentation trail now before you need it. Action 3. Start the executive conversation about decision governance. This is not just an IT conversation. It's not just a legal conversation. It is a strategy and operating model conversation. The organizations that will navigate the next phase of AI successfully are the ones that build structured governance systems, not checklists, that answer the question, how do we make defensible decisions when the right answer is not obvious?
Let's run through a quick scenario before we close, because theory's one thing, but let's see this in practice. A manager at your company is caught using a free AI tool to draft a termination letter. They uploaded the employee's performance history and medical leave records to do it. This is the shadow AI crisis scenario, and it is exactly why governance matters. Rebecca, how do we handle this?
Step 1 is containment. Identify exactly what tool was used, exactly what was entered, who had access, and whether the data may have left your controlled environment. Contact legal and IT immediately to assess ADA, confidentiality, state privacy, and security implications. In narrower circumstances, additional HIPAA-related analysis may also be relevant.
And then we have to assess the intent, right?
Exactly. Step 2 is assessment. Apply context. Was this a well-intentioned employee trying to save time or a knowing circumvention of policy? Intent doesn't erase the problem, but it shapes the response. And if you had no AI policy or training in place when this happened, that is a governance failure the organization needs to own and address. Step 3 is action and governance. Address the conduct under your acceptable use framework. Then use the incident as a teachable moment across the organization. Reinforce the human review standard, clarify data boundaries, and update training.
That is exactly the kind of structured, defensible decision-making process that the CriticalThink HR methodology is built on. We ask not just what's legal, but what's defensible. Before we close, I want to point you to 2 resources we've put together specifically for what we discussed today. The first is the Ethical AI Implementation Kit, available in the link below. This is a practical, ready-to-deploy toolkit priced at $47 that gives you everything you need to act on what we just covered. It includes 9 ready-to-deploy tools for HR leaders, including a ready-to-customize interim AI acceptable use policy, an HR tech vendor AI audit checklist with the exact questions we walk through, a 48-hour crisis response plan for shadow AI incidents, an employee rollout email template, manager FAQs and talking points so your leaders can answer the hard questions, an employee acknowledgement form, an AI governance risk triage matrix, and an executive risk briefing slide template that is C-suite ready. It is designed to stop the bleeding while you build the broader governance structure behind it. And we're doing something incredibly special for anyone who picks this up today. Rebecca, do you want to share the bonus?
Absolutely. Anyone who purchases the $47 kit today will also receive a 30-day free access pass to the full CriticalThink HR platform. Normally, our public preview is strictly limited to 3 days and caps you at just 55 SHRM CP questions and 55 SHRM SCP questions. But with this pass, you get 30 full days of completely unlimited access to our entire 2026 test bank for both exams. And to be clear, that doesn't just mean our situational judgment items. You also get unrestricted access to our massive bank of regular multiple choice knowledge questions and foundational knowledge items, or FKIs.
Exactly. And I want to emphasize this because it's important. There is absolutely no credit card required to claim this pass. It will not automatically enroll you in a subscription, and there is 0 automatic charges. We will simply send you a reminder when your 30 days are approaching. It is also worth noting that our entire coverage is fully aligned with SHRM's 2026 BASC. We built this to reflect the exact weightings you should expect to see, perfectly mapped out across all knowledge domains, functional areas, behavioral clusters, and behavioral competencies. Inside the platform, you will find an AI executive mentor that analyzes your performance and provides personalized coaching, the CriticalThink Advantage methodology, and secure video reasoning walkthroughs for over 7,000 scenarios. Check the link in the description to grab your kit and unlock your 30-day pass today.
The AI landscape is moving fast. The HR leaders who will lead through it are the ones building their decision governance muscles right now. Thanks for joining us today for this CriticalThink HR Executive Briefing. Start now.